Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Drunk Bible Study Bonus Edition, where we, as is tradition, are doing a quiz at the end of a book. But today is a very special day because rather than finding a random quiz or quizzes on the internet, which is what we have done up until now, we actually have a real professor of Bibling, a professor of theology. This is Dr. Jeremy L. Williams, P.H.D., who is an assistant professor of New Testament at Brite Divinity School, where he is also the inaugural director of the Center of Theology and Justice. He is the author of the book Criminalization in Acts of the Apostles, Race, Rhetoric, and the Prosecution of an Early Christian Movement. I have a lot of questions about that. Put a pin in that. And his current research project is a manuscript entitled Abolitionists' Acts of the Apostles, Hermeneutics of Imagination. Again, more questions. I'll put a pin in that too. He began his academic work on Acts while getting his P.H.D. at Harvard University. That was the school we originally wanted to give us an honorary.
No, it was Yale. It's Yale Divinity.
Yale Divinity.
We initially wanted.
So sorry.
Yeah.
We will not be accepted into Harvard, sadly. Let's be honest.
Okay, so he earned his Master of Divinity from Yale Divinity School. That's the school that we wanted to give us an honorary degree. And he received the Henry Hallam Tweedy Award, which is the highest award given to graduating students. He graduated with highest honors in religious studies and economics from Vanderbilt University, and he's also an elder in full connection in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, and he's a native of Huntsville, Alabama. Welcome, Professor Williams. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello.
Those are some accolades.
Thanks for having me. I've been enjoying listening.
Yeah.
Thank you. Wow.
So our listeners of our show know that we have recently began a sort of relationship with Brite Divinity School after the president of the school gave us a shout out and a proclamation congratulating us on finishing the Gospels and offering us some free tuition, which we've been talking very seriously amongst ourselves about how we might put that into practice, put that to use. But you're here because you are a specialist in the book of Acts.
Yes. And I want to say that I caught what you, the message the president gave you, President Stephen Katie, and when you all were looking at Acts 14 and 15, he said that you're not always wrong. And I want to defend him in saying that he didn't mean it condescending in any way. and I think that you all's assessment that the Bible is not always wrong is a good way to approach it.
We appreciated it very much.
Man. We took no offense to that at all. We took it as a huge compliment, actually. We want it to be our new tagline, not always wrong. It's amazing. We love that. That's really the best compliment he could give us. So definitely, we did not take that as an insult at all. Could you tell us why is it that Acts was the thing that you ended up focusing on and writing this book about?
Well, as you all have seen, Acts is a wild story, right? And frequently in churches and in especially like formation for younger people, most of the stories in Acts don't really get told. There's the highlight moments, but people don't look at the larger narrative. And one particular thing that caught my attention is these Jesus followers, they keep getting put in jail. Like they are regularly coming into contact with the carceral complex of the Roman Empire in one way or another. And so that's had some parallels for me in American criminalization and incarceration crisis to think about how do we put these in conversation with each other. And what if we think about this minoritized group in line with other people who are capriciously mistreated by government officials and imprisoned and incarcerated. And so that's what kind of led to the genesis of my research questions and where I try to think with these biblical texts to do some justice work or to reimagine what can be done with these to help envision a better world.
That's amazing.
Well, speaking of that, the part of Acts that has sucked me in the most like there's this whole section where like Paul sort of lays claim to like all these different ethnicities in order to avoid being put in prison or getting in trouble, right? You know, pointing out the fact that he's a Roman citizen and like he speaks all these languages and things like that. Can you offer us any insight into that? Like I was never taught that in Sunday school. And it's unclear to me, like, is he lying? Is he like really, really smart and like he knows the legal code very, very well and that's why he's trying to defend his own rights? Like what is going on there?
I actually do some writing on this particular issue, especially in Acts 21 when he is using these different citizenship pieces and ethnic identifier markers. One thing that I invite people to think about when we read Acts and probably the New Testament biblical text more broadly is that these are literary constructs that an author is using to persuade an audience of some things. And so one thing that we can see is that Luke is really invested in making Paul look like a serious hero, like a badass, if you will. I often refer to Acts as Paul fan fiction.
Oh, fascinating.
Because you get a much better image of Paul in Acts than you'll see when we get to the letters that you all are about to do. You get Paul as this great rhetorician, but in his own writing, he'll say, well, I didn't come with you as a great speaker. Right. And so there's this way that Acts is attempting to make Paul this super representative of the movement. He's a Roman citizen, even though in his letters he never talks about being a Roman citizen. He speaks eloquent Greek, and sometimes his letters, the Greek isn't great.
Wow.
So he's this great major figure because Acts loves Paul, is in love with Paul, as we can see.
Wow.
Yeah, because no, it makes sense because in all of our stories with Paul and Acts, like he can talk his way out of any scrape.
He's very squirrely.
And he's very squirrely. He can predict things. Like he has all these "I told you so" moments. Like it definitely makes him sound like he's got like really high charisma points. Essentially,
fascinating.
Huh.
And as you all frequently bring in literature, to think about Acts as literature is a useful way to say, oh, of course he can speak out very well here because Acts wants to portray him as besting his opponents.
Right.
Think about it. In these really intense moments, who's going to have such an eloquent speech?
Right, sure. While you're
when an angry
prison,
mob is like carrying you to the centurion. Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So can I ask, like, I have heard of these letters that are about to come that we're going to read next, but when was the time in which he started to write them? Was it when he was in jail? Was it when he was in his summer home after he got let out of jail? What happened here?
His Malta home.
Okay, Rome,
yes.
Sorry.
One thing to note is that his letters are the earliest texts in the New Testament. And so before we have Gospels, before we have the story in Acts, we have Paul and this random collection of letters. And the scholarly side was the 7 authentic letters. And of those, they're written in the 40s and the 50s. And we don't get Mark's gospel till about 70 CE. And then Acts, we don't date that until 115, 130. And that probably before 130. But so we're really getting a second, third, beyond generations for Acts.
Interesting.
And so they're trying to clean up or make sense of this person who's writing letters to these disparate communities across the Mediterranean.
Right.
And trying to bring it into cohesion. And interestingly, Acts never mentions Paul writing any letters.
No.
Yeah, we never noticed that.
Yeah, I guess that's true. He's just always breaking out of prison and talking his way out of sticky situations.
And really funny that he became this kind of mythical figure later on in terms of talking about the timeline in which this was written versus when it actually came out. If you're saying the letters were the first thing in the New Testament that was written, I guess that's because Paul was alive right after Jesus died.
Right. And part of what you notice as you're reading through, as you just finished the Gospels and move into Acts, that the canonizing process is telling a particular story as well.
Right.
So you start with stories of Jesus, then you get this idea of what's called a church history. That's really kind of Paul praise. And then you get these letters from Paul that kind of tells you how to read them. People read them in light of Acts, but the Paul of Acts and the Paul of the letters are not the same.
Interesting.
Boy, yeah, the power of editing.
Yeah, really.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the greatest editing job in the history of humanity, apparently.
For sure.
Western civilization.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's a positive thing. It's just
It's a thing, yeah.
It's what it's happened.
Well, exactly. I mean, and again, this is just from, I guess, hearsay from hearing Jason Dedeker talk about it, but they talk about this very different Paul in the letters versus what we just read. And I guess I'm curious, like, how do you reconcile the two together? Because they sort of both exist in this story, but they are, I guess, different interpretations of the same character. And so when people see it more as one thing versus another, what's the reality there?
Well, that's how I take my job as like a Bible seminary or divinity school professor. It's to untangle them.
Yeah.
It's to say these are not the same. So now deal with that. And
that's good.
And of those letters that are attributed to Paul, what do we think of people writing in Paul's name later to say that this is what Paul said, but called themselves Paul?
Wow.
How do we make all of this? And what is happening in these early Christianities, as I like to call them, when they're trying to argue for who's at the top and which perspective and which view of Jesus, which view of Paul should be the one that everybody adopts.
Sure.
I like the idea to think about these early Jesus followers as in a tussle, like it's almost like a Royal Rumble. Like if we could use a wrestling metaphor, trying to. And so our imagination of a clean, tidy origin story, even with Acts, you see it's not super clean.
Sure.
And that's like attempting to show it as a straight line, but it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember something that we read about the book of Acts versus Paul's letters is that in the book of Acts, it kind of presents Christianity as a little more cohesive. And there's a lot of stories, especially early on in Acts, where it's like they gave the speech and all the Christians came together and they all united and it was great. And then Paul's letters are much more, we're so divided, we're not doing the same stuff. We need a...
Right, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, like how different that, like the image of the church is that they're trying to convey in both places.
Which when we think about the temporal difference, there's different problems, different issues on the ground.
Right, that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
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 The difference between starting groups and the difference between you've been at this for 60 years or so.
Right.
So I don't know if you're aware of this from listening to the show, but as we've been reading through the entire Bible, we've been casting various celebrities and actors as different characters in the Bible. Of course, all leading up to when we finally get all the money to produce a really amazing long epic series. And so our listeners really campaigned for Justin Timberlake to be cast as Paul in particular. And so like people in the chat are wanting to know, how do you feel about that casting? If you disagree with it, who would you cast as Paul in the book of Acts?
You know, I think that can work because Justin Timberlake is a good guy and a bad guy.
Yeah, right? Okay, I love that.
He brought sexy back, which is both good and simple.
Yeah, but then he also got Janet Jackson in a lot of trouble.
You're right.
So there's this like
that was not cool.
Yeah, so there's which like Paul is not cool in a lot of ways, but a lot of people think that Paul brought sexy back. So
yeah, I don't know if Paul brought sexy back. I think it's the opposite. He took it away.
And I don't know who thinks it. Some people do. Some people do. Some people love Paul.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, people do love Paul. Yeah. If he says things they agree with, they tend to love him more.
Sure.
That's been my experience at least.
Okay, so I'm just consulting my notes of like some of the questions that came up for us during the reading today. When you were diving into studying Acts, did you suddenly have to learn how to sail?
I always tell people when you read Acts, you need a map next to you.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
You need like one of those maps in the Bible or something.
Because a lot of places.
It's moving around in places that we are not familiar with at all. I mean, except for you who've done all this travel.
Yes, we have.
I guess that helps a little.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have been to a few of the places.
I was listening. This traveling, especially in the Mediterranean.
Yeah. I have done some travel around, the Mediterranean, the Aegean coast and stuff like that. Like, have visited some of the places where he sent various letters, which was cool.
Have you been to Malta?
I've not been to Malta.
Just our editor is from Malta, so that's our only touch point.
That's our only touch point. Okay, and then Jace, I also wrote down that you had a question about like, what's the deal with when people actually start using the word Christians or like start identifying as Christians, or when like that term actually starts to get dropped in the Bible as we know it today?
That was going to be one of the questions on the quiz.
Oh.
So I guess I'll give you this. It'll be a freebie.
Well, and like you give us a hint.
You can give us a hint. Yeah.
It's around that time when Paul, or he Saul at that time, gets sent out he and Barnabas get sent out.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. We'll try not to spoil the quiz too much.
Okay. Should we do this quiz?
Yeah, we should probably.
Well, this also actually, it leads to a bigger conceptual question. So I can either do that now, or I plan on doing it at the end of the quiz.
Let's do the quiz first, and then we'll have some more questions after.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's dive into it.
All right.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
I'm so nervous. Everybody.
All right.
Let's do this. Okay.
And so I'm glad you let me save the quiz because there's 12 questions, like 12 apostles, Acts of the Apostles.
Oh, nice.
Dr. Williams, have you ever had any students show up having like had a few beers and show up to class or show up
sure
to
I have.
quiz?
Not that you knew of, though.
Maybe didn't notice. Yeah, they didn't advertise that like we would.
And so because of that, the first set of questions are pretty straightforward. There are a couple multiple choice.
Okay.
But then they get a little bit more complex as we go along.
Okay.
Oh boy. Do we want to do this as in like we answer it and then we get the right answer right afterwards? Or
yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll
go after each one right after. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Acts
is the second installment of which gospel?
Luke.
A, Matthew. B, Mark. C, Luke. D, John.
Luke.
Emily got it.
C, final answer.
And that is correct.
Nice.
Yay.
So far, so good.
Number 2. On what occasion did the Holy Goose, as Jay says, first fill the Jesus believers in Jerusalem?
Oh, is that not multiple choice?
Oh, no, it's not multiple choice. There's two multiple choice. There's another one later. So there's no multiple choice here.
That's the Pentecost.
Pentecost, that's right.
Yes.
That's right.
And that was literally the thing that I just screwed up earlier in this episode. So that's good. We got that.
Yeah. Not the Epiphany, the Pentecost, yes.
Yeah, good job.
Number 3. Why did Ananias and Sapphira die when they lied to St. Peter the Communist?
Because he force choked them to death because they didn't give all the money from their property.
Oh, yeah, the property.
Because they saved some of the money for themselves.
Not cool.
Yes.
Not cool.
Yes.
Okay.
Now I'm sorry, real quick. In your classes, do you explain that as Peter force choking them to death like Darth Vader?
You know, after hearing you say that, it made me rethink if that's what happened. You know, it's generally similar to the way you talked about how Herod, after he has James killed, and then he sees it as a God, this divine hand acts.
Right. Okay.
But some have postulated that this is the disciples killing somebody.
Yeah.
But has anyone postulated that they did it through the Force?
The Force.
Force choke.
No, that is an original thesis.
See, this is my thesis paper. I'm already planning it.
That's okay.
There you go.
Yeah, it's good.
There you go. That's the hermeneutics part.
Yeah.
Bring in Star Wars as an interpretive lens.
Love that.
Okay. Number 4. How did Stephen become the first martyr?
Through stoning. He was stoned.
Yeah.
Bad boy.
Yeah.
But he wasn't bad. He was a good boy. He was just telling the truth, and they stoned him anyways.
So I guess I didn't even put that together. He counts as the first martyred.
I actually didn't realize that.
I guess the Catholics would call him a saint. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got so distracted by like the death of Jesus, right? We're still recovering from that.
Reeling from that.
No, but Stephen was a big deal too. We were like, wait a minute, but they killed him? What? And it was really unfortunate. Poor guy.
And actually, the writer of Luke Acts uses scenes from Mark's portrayal of Jesus' crucifixion in Stephen's.
Oh,
Whoa.
so he's like doing a little callback.
Yeah.
I didn't even catch that.
Wow.
Wow.
So that you really do see Stephen look a lot like Jesus.
Okay.
Dang.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Good to know.
Okay, number 5. Where did Paul Saul first encounter Jesus?
That was on the road to Damascus.
There you
Okay,
go.
yes.
Yes.
I knew it was on the road, but I couldn't remember where to. Okay, I'm glad you're on my
That
team.
was the
Damascus.
one. Yes.
Sounds like a place he would go.
Right, that was the one where like suddenly there was a bright light, like brighter than the sun, and that's when he saw
Yes.
Jesus. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Number 6. What major difference does Acts highlight between Jewish males and Gentile/heathen males?
The foreskin.
Circumcision.
Yes.
The penile head, as Emily
Yes.
would put it.
All of the above.
Oh my gosh.
I appreciate that you created this quiz for us.
I can tell you know what we pay attention to.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good pedagogy, right? Like,
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I can't expect you to know stuff that you
That we
That we
don't
have
care
not
about.
studied.
Yeah, you're right.
That's something
Yeah,
we
we can't
clearly
study
care
it.
about.
Yeah, the study guide was your own podcast.
Oh, this is perfect.
That is convenient.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what I
you're
should have
right.
binged before this.
So I'd be extra embarrassing if we failed this quiz.
Yeah. Jeez.
Number 7. How were Paul, Silas, and their cohort released from their imprisonment in Philippi?
That was the one where like an angel came. Or wait, what? Okay, sorry. There was a couple different instances where they got
There's
out
a
of
bunch of prison breaks.
Yeah,
See, that's why
yeah.
I was interested in writing on it. There's a bunch of, but it's not that one.
Yes. Okay. Because one of them was like an angel who showed up, and then one of them was like an earthquake that happened, and then they.
The earthquake.
Okay.
It was the
Okay.
earthquake.
All right.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
So Philippi was the earthquake.
The angel frees Peter.
Got it. Okay.
Mhm. And so now we've
And
made it to the
that
last
one-
section. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna. So that one was the earthquake that just like broke down the wall. That wasn't the one where they like snuck out and the guards didn't even know, and then later.
Yeah,
they
that
were
was
like,
a different one.
Oh, that was a different
Okay.
one. Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
that was the angel at the beginning.
Yes.
Right.
Mm.
Okay.
It's Peter. He sees these angels break him out of prison.
Right.
Paul's in jail. It has to be something else.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
If he gets out, which leads to this last question, or this number 8, before I make the turn.
Hold on. Whoa, hold on.
Yeah.
Are you just about to do like a M. Night Shyamalan on us and be like, is Paul actually dead for the last half of the book? Like, that's what I thought you were. He's been in prison. He died in prison. And the whole rest is like in the afterlife. It's
Paul's
his
ghost.
dream. Like,
That
Now I want to watch
that might
Sixth
answer
Sense.
why the
Right?
book ends the way it does.
shit.
Mm.
Oh, this is blowing my mind. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for interrupting. Please continue.
And we'll talk about that because that was a really good question around why does the book end the way it does.
Yeah.
It's because Paul is dead and everybody knows how he died, right?
What?
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, we got to put a pin
Spoilers.
in that.
Okay,
We got to
okay.
put
We'll
a
come
pin
back
in
to
that.
that.
Okay, we'll come back. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number 8. What is the wrongdoing that Paul is accused of in Jerusalem? And it's the basis for his imprisonment for the rest of the book.
He claims that his wrongdoing is claiming that there's a resurrection.
Right. But what's he accused of?
Was he actually, it was like blaspheming or
Jesus? No.
yeah, what was it wasn't just talking about Jesus, it was something else. It was
Oh, saying that like Jesus was the Son of God? No.
No, it wasn't that.
no, it was like they did accuse him of some specific
I mean, like
Ah.
my modern day sensibilities wants to piece this together that that it is about him claiming that Christ was the Messiah, that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. But no, you're
that's
shaking
not
your
it.
head.
No, it was something else that they it was either like inspiring people to riot or it was like breaking shit in the temple or something like that.
Wait,
it was
John Doff is saying, did it have to do with not keeping kosher and teaching other Jews they didn't have to when he claimed he just didn't make Gentiles keep the law?
I don't think it was that.
That's getting closer.
Yeah, was there something about that, about bringing in Gentiles, being like, it's okay?
Uh,
There it is.
Gentiles, just Gentiles
They
in
said
general.
he brought a Gentile heathen into the temple.
that was that the Greek
Okay.
guy? Was that the
Trophimus, yeah, from Ephesus.
Yes.
Oh,
They said that he brought
yes.
a Gentile heathen into the temple.
Right, and he claimed that he did not.
Right.
They were just pals. Okay.
It's not even like it's Jesus claims that gets him put in jail. This is the claim. It's
just the
just that he
Gentile.
brought a Greek guy
He just had a Greek friend
in.
Mm.
Yeah.
that he brought into the temple.
Don't do that. Don't have that.
And that was the guy that was like fully converted, was like, oh yeah, man, for sure. Jesus is the guy that he met on his travels. That one?
he was a part of the movement with Paul, but he didn't go. But he wasn't Jewish in that way.
Right.
And so they said Paul says he didn't take him into the temple, and so because there were certain parts of the temple that Gentile heathens weren't allowed to go into.
Wow. Okay. All right. We definitely failed that question, but that's really interesting.
Okay. I'll give us a fail on that.
And one reason I wanted to raise that is because of how often this text is used to kind of like talk about for preaching the gospel to get you in trouble.
Yeah.
But that's not what gets Paul in trouble. Like it's not preaching
into the temple. Yeah.
Okay.
It's something that would seem arbitrary to us.
Right.
But somebody that's not a Jewish person
wasn't allowed to be in
guess
the
that's
temple.
a Gentile at all. Yeah,
Yeah.
that shouldn't be there. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Wow.
Which highlights that there's a lot more socio-politically happening in the text than kind of just theological
Sure.
preaching
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is driving the narrative.
For sure.
And that's the part that I love, that we have a professor here to help us get some of that. Because I feel like there's been a lot of books where we've had a sense of like, there's some political motivation behind what's going on here, but we don't quite have enough context just from the text and from like the Wikipedia pages we read to know what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
So here's where we take the turn to the conceptual, but I'm starting it with a multiple choice.
Okay.
Oh boy. Okay.
And this is in line with the political conversation we're having. Which activities do Roman officials commit in Acts? A, ask for bribes. B, imprison people based on false charges. C, flog citizens without a trial. D, all of the above.
Shit.
D?
Okay, test-taking skills. If you don't know, it's safest to say
Always
all of the above. Yes.
But I don't recall
I don't recall that. No, the flogging without a trial, yes, because that's the one that Paul got out of by saying he's a Greek citizen. What are they doing? And they were like, oh shit. They were all freaked out by that. So like definitely that one. What was the first? What was A?
Ask for bribes.
I don't remember them explicitly asking for bribes, but I also wouldn't put it past them.
You remember when Felix had Paul in custody?
Oh yeah, you're right. And he kept waiting for him to offer.
Yes.
So all of the above?
All of the above for sure.
Okay.
All of the above?
All of the above.
Wow. All right.
So the Roman officials aren't these great innocent arbiters of justice.
Right.
I mean, did any of us think that they were?
I mean,
some people do.
Yeah.
Some people really do.
I mean, I will say, to be fair, I felt like this sort of Roman judicial system on the whole actually seemed decently legit to me in terms of like them conquering and like being in charge of the Jewish people. It seemed like compared to previous times that's happened in the Old Testament, there was less like oppression and you can't believe your own stuff, you can't do your thing, and a little more of like, you can still have your temples, you can still have your own laws. We just like don't want to get involved in that. That was my impression compared to like previous times that were mentioned in the Old Testament. Am I off base there?
Well, here's a part of the backdrop that we have to remember, that if Acts is written in the 2nd century, the 100s, 110, 15 or so, the temple was destroyed in 70 CE. So at this point, this imagined past with the temple is after the Romans have destroyed the temple.
Oh.
Right.
Oh.
So there's this shadow of Roman oppression, and it's only less than a couple of decades from when there'd be the Bar Kokhba revolt, where the Romans would completely finish razing the city of Jerusalem and rename it.
Oh, interesting.
And rename the entire region of Judea.
Huh.
And so that's a part of this backdrop too. But it's hard to have that full-throated critique when the Romans are in charge.
Sure. Yeah.
I see. So meaning like this is all written when we're fully subsumed into Roman culture, and so we can't talk too much shit or at least not overtly. Is that kind of what you're getting at here?
That's part of my reading.
Wow.
Okay.
Because they don't portray these officials as completely good guys.
Right.
Sure.
But there's no like, they shouldn't have destroyed the temple, but they shouldn't raise the city and banish Jewish people from living here. There's none of that.
Yeah, you're right. That wasn't mentioned at all.
There's a retooling.
Yeah, so we can't be too outspoken in our criticism of the existing power structure.
Right.
Yeah.
We can just kind of color our telling of it a little bit to indicate that, like, maybe these aren't the most trustworthy authority figures.
This reminds me of studying the works of Shostakovich when I was a composition major,
Indeed.
where he was a composer during Soviet Russia. And like a lot of his pieces he wrote were like about some Soviet victory in a war or some pro-Soviet thing. And yet, if you like analyze the music theory of what he's doing, it's like he's kind of casting doubt on that or casting some suspicion on that. But in this like very subtle way where overtly the title of the piece is like the victory in whatever war or whatever situation, but that he's like trying to very subtly subvert that. And it seems like maybe we've got a similar thing going on here that we just didn't have the context for.
Right.
Wow.
And how does that, you were interested about the hermeneutics question, how does tending to these type of facts or pieces of information shape how we read?
Yeah. I think hugely so.
Yeah, of course.
Are you ready for another question?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Sure,
we should try to finish up this quiz.
We're trying to put those off because they're harder now.
So the question that we raised, this is number 10. Where were the disciples first called Christians?
Right. That's where we started this whole journey.
Well, maybe this is cheating, or maybe this is ask the audience, but some audience members have dropped the word Antioch a couple times.
Yes, that's Acts 11:26.
Thank you, audience. Thank you.
11:26. Okay.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll get a half point on that one.
Now this is a separate question, but it's a corollary to that one. What is Acts' most popular name or its favorite name for the group of Jesus followers?
The Acts of the Apostles?
The brothers?
Brothers. The siblings. The
The
brethren. The
sect?
That's a good one. But sect is getting close. Sect is getting close.
Is it not cult?
Well, so because the word is translated different ways,
right?
We'll say the way. You remember talking about the way?
Oh,
Yes, the
yes,
way.
we got
This
that
is
a
the
couple
way.
times in this translation.
Yes,
The
they talked about it.
Mandalorian.
We talked about it.
The Greek word
This
is
the way.
hey hodos, or it can be the way or the movement.
The
The way.
movement.
This is the way.
Huh.
This is the
In my work, I call it the Messiah movement
Yeah.
because Christ is anointed one or Messiah. So Messiah movement. And so that's the most popular name. And I raised this question because they don't call themselves Christians.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the way.
And I argue and others argue that whenever we see Christian here and even and the only other time it shows up in the New Testament in Peter is a derogatory term.
Interesting.
The Christian doesn't even start to mean what it means in contemporary times until later in the 2nd century. And it really doesn't even reflect what contemporary Christians are until the 4th century. So in some ways, what we are really seeing is this Messiah movement aligned with Jewish tradition. And so this gets us to our 12th question. How could thinking of the way or the Messiah movement as a Jewish sect impact what we've read in Acts, especially the last chapter?
Okay, especially the last chapter.
Oh.
I know we just read it, but what even happened in the last chapter?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about how the Jews there that he brought in to talk to were like, yeah, we haven't heard anything bad about you specifically, but we've heard nothing but bad things about these Christians. What gives? And then Paul gave his speech to them and talked to them for a while, and then they went out and bickered more. And I guess my answer would be that it's kind of similar to, it seems like a divide they already had between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, where there's kind of a theological divide in terms of what we believe about the afterlife. And now there's this like other sect of Judaism that's like, no, this Messiah we all know about, it's already happened. versus it being something that's still coming.
There's like an opening rather than a closing, rather than a like, we are specific to this group of people, but rather we can be open to a variety of people in, I guess, it all over the world, all over this nation, these many nations.
Just all the
Yeah.
Gentiles.
There is that too.
can
This
join
idea
now.
that the Gentiles could be involved now. Yeah.
Well, that captures a lot of it, especially in thinking about the Pharisees and Sadducees, as like remembering that ancient Jewishness had multiple different groups, different schools of thought, different ways to be Jewish, different ways to understand how heathens, Gentiles could be incorporated into the movement, how close they could be. And so that's a part of why I'm raising this, is to think about what if this is not the start of Christianity, but a Jewish movement that understood Jesus as the Messiah that hasn't yet become this kind of Christianity we think of.
Yeah. So much of, I think, the tension in a lot of the chapters of Acts, to me, seems like it's, speaking to something kind of like, well, if we don't require circumcision and we don't require eating, kosher foods, and we don't require this, and we don't require that, like, how do we maintain an actual sense of Jewish identity, right? And then kind of scrambling to be like, okay, well, the Jews can still do their Jewish things and maintain their identity, but we want to bring in the Gentiles, but they don't need to do circumcision, but they need to do these things in order to be, considered a part of our group. So, like, I feel like thinking of it as a Jewish offset, to me, I think, like, explains more of the tension there, right? And the reason why some of the Jews get so upset, right, is it seems like it's like, how do we actually maintain a sense that this is still Jewish, if we're inviting in all these different people and if we're abandoning certain, like, very specific identifying markers that make our religious practice Jewish and sets it apart from other religious practices.
And I think thinking with it like that will also impact how you start to read Paul's letter. Because recognizing that this is a real issue, right? How do Jewish practices adapt to these Gentile heathens?
Right.
Like, how many of those practices have to be given up?
Yeah.
Can you still worship Aphrodite and Artemis and worship the god of Judea?
Where's the line?
Well, I see, like, where's the line? Like, if you don't, I see.
Can I go to the barbecue that was sacrificed to Zeus and then go to the synagogue? Like, or come to the worship service? Like, how do we negotiate this? And it's a complicated thing because there's still you still got to do some Judaizing.
Yeah.
Right.
It brings back a lot of, I've alluded to this on the show before, but it brings back a lot of childhood memories that, like, when I was about a tween was when my mom and stepdad, like, I don't know how this happened, but, like, they sort of, like, became friends with some, like, Messianic Jewish people, like some Jews for Jesus, right? And we were Christian. And so there was a really weird period of a couple of years in my household where there was a little bit of this, like, oh, but, like, Christianity is actually rooted in Judaism. And so maybe we should actually be turning to Jewish traditions to sort of shore up our Christian faith. And then when I look back on it in retrospect, it feels like there's a little bit of tension around, like, how much of Judaism is appropriate for Christians to appropriate, right? And claim that they can now take part in. Like, is it okay for Christians to, like, decide to take part in a Passover, for instance, and kind of claim it
all over the place?
Yeah, but it's, like, a little bit fuzzy because of the fact that Christianity sprang out of Judaism, and there are some things that it's like Christians still accept the Old Testament, right, the Torah, as part of their own religious text. So that's what it makes me think of.
And part of that is what the relationship between Jewish practices and the nascent, I guess, Christian movements before the Constantine in the 4th century, where there wasn't, even in the 4th century, there's a lot of cross-pollination. But the difference between that, again, in the Mediterranean centuries ago versus people on the other side of the Constantine Empire thinking about Christianity as a particular type of institutional imperial power, and then adopting other traditions to bolster its power is a little bit of a different project.
Yeah.
Then these really small groups trying to make sense of what it means to be in relationship with the God of Judea after the destruction of the temple, after your homeland has been occupied, after like the leader you follow has been executed in the most vile way by the Romans, there's a different kind of set of questions than just which theology am I leaning into? It's how do we make some identity for ourselves?
Sure.
I feel like that's a little bit something that we first started hitting up against way back in Exodus, I want to say, is when we first started butting up against this of like with the way that you perceive these people when you read the story is, are they the underdogs or are they the people in power? And their actions, like the same actions, can read very different depending on how you're interpreting them. And it seemed like when we were reading through the Torah, that there were times where it was either. Like it would kind of switch back and forth of like when they were the underdogs in that story versus when like, no, now you're kind of the ones in power oppressing these other people. And that I feel like this is almost kind of continuing on that same thing of if we look at some of these stories through the lens of the Christianity we know today, which is this massive powerhouse that's kind of like the norm in all of the Western world and, has a lot of power over our culture and how we think versus thinking about it as this kind of fringe group that maybe was being persecuted, or maybe some of that's made up. Like, we don't know, but it really changes how we read it depending on how we view like the amount of power or influence they have.
Certainly.
Well,
damn.
Did we get that last question right?
Yeah, you got to score us on that.
Does it count?
Where are we at? Are we at like a solid 80?
That's your first step into the divinity school. There is no closed answer to that.
Okay.
It was.
You got us.
What we just did, that type of collective work together. That's the A. That's the fulfillment.
Right. How do we score this quiz?
I'm going to give us 9.5 out of 12. I think if I tracked it all correctly, which is a solid 79%. And if we're going to grade a little bit on a curve, then it will give us an 80%. So
like a Singapore B.
We'll call it a Singapore B.
Got it.
But I think we should leave this to the professor.
What do you think we got?
What's your kind of assessment of us on this quiz?
Well, I think that especially the engagement on that last question and the thinking through, I can give this a solid A minus.
Okay, great. Wow. Yeah, we make it up with the participation points.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only thing that got you gotta know where they became Christian, when they first called Christians. You gotta know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it. We'll work harder on that.
Yeah.
Like when somebody asks you about Acts, you gotta know Paul was on the road.
Yeah.
You gotta know those things.
Right.
Yeah, we got to get that map for sure.
Yeah, we should probably memorize all the cities that he visited or something too, because that probably
Malta's the last. Yes, it's good.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, this has been extremely illuminating, and maybe apparently you have some things to say about Revelation. So I feel like we should do this again when we get there,
which
bring you back. Will be in less than a year at this point.
Yeah.
Which is that's so wild. That's coming up so soon.
It is wild to think about the fact that we have done this show for how many years? 5 years? 6 years?
6 years.
And that the amount, we just finished the first book after the Gospels, and yet the rest of the book is going to take less than a year.
Yeah.
It's incredible how much larger the Old Testament is than the New.
Yeah.
But what people in Christianity are looking to is this set of books. So that's really interesting to me. Yeah.
I just want to say real quick that the chat has been blowing up about how much they love having you here.
We need more expert guests. We
Williams.
love the professor. Let's take another 6 years. Come back, professor. Yay. Encore.
Yeah. So this has been great. I did have a couple things I wanted to touch on before we let you go here so that we can get a really fully fleshed out episode here. So one is you alluded a little bit to this thing of it ending on a cliffhanger.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Paul's dead. Paul is dead. The only thing I know about that is if you play the Beatles album backwards, it says that. I'm assuming they were talking about this Paul, right?
Yeah, that's what they were talking about.
Yeah.
Well, if we think about the timeline that I gave around this being written at least 70 years after Paul is writing his letters. Paul, especially in Christian tradition, is perceived as having been killed by the Emperor Nero.
Mm.
And so what is part of early Christian stories is that Paul goes to Rome and dies in Rome at the hands of the emperor.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
And so part of the story.
So he made his court date, but it didn't go well for him.
Right.
Wait, so is Nero the Caesar at this time that he's going to see?
The tricky thing is that because Acts is really more of a more popular novelty than actual history, it's hard to really place. But generally, if we map the times together, then Nero or thereabout is the emperor, who is alleged to have burned Rome, hates Christians as different historians like Suetonius and others name. But all of that is a little speculative. But it's around the time that they're thinking that Nero would have been in power towards the end of Acts. Yeah.
So if we were reading this closer to the time it was written, when we got to that cliffhanger ending where it's like, and then he spent those years in his house, we would have left that going, oh shit. Like, we all know what happens next.
Because you're already getting that, like, the Jewish community for Acts is not really feeling Paul. And so he says, now I'm about to go to the heathens and tell them. And you can kind of tell how I'm about to go preach to the heathens would sound to somebody.
And wait, and the story, hold on, but the story is not that Paul died from a sudden snake bite.
Right.
From building a fire on top of a snake pit. Okay.
And that's a part of like the dramatic tension because everybody knows that Paul gets killed or that community would have said, oh, Paul is going to die at the hands of them. They're waiting for that to happen. Yeah. So the snake bite at the end, you're like, well, we're in the last chapter. Is this about time for Paul to die? And then he shakes it off and you see the snake viper thing. You're like, okay, so how does he die?
Yeah.
And Acts says, got you.
Interesting.
That is a very different dynamic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the one other thing I wanted to ask is that, starting next week, we're going to be going into reading Paul's letters. And it's just, is there anything that you might want to leave us with as we go into that to help give us some perspective, make it interesting? I'm honestly like, there have been some parts of the Bible I've been nervous about us getting into because I worry about it being boring.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if there's anything you can give us.
This is one of them?
I don't know, actually, because I haven't really read all of them, right? So I guess that's what I'm asking. Is there anything that can help with that?
There's a lot of things, but three things, especially as you're about to go into Romans. As you've noticed, I keep using the term heathens instead of Gentiles or pairing it with Gentiles to think about the kind of world that Paul is imagining. That there's Jews and then everybody else, heathens, really. And so how can heathens be in relationship with the God of Judea? That actually is a big question at the beginning of Romans. The second thing, and this will be really important for reading the first chapter of Romans, is to remember that Paul is only one voice in a community. That although Paul's is the voice that's recorded, Paul is not the only voice in these early communities. And there could very well have been somebody listening that said, who the hell is he?
Okay.
Got it.
Or who is this Paul? And when you get to the Corinthians, you'll see that there really were people who were like, I don't care to hear what you have to say, Paul. So remember that group is there.
Okay.
The people beside Paul.
And those people beside Paul, though, are other Christians. Or would they have called themselves Christians yet at that point, or still no?
Well, and that's part of the third thing. Pay attention to the actual terms. What you'll see, you won't see Christians in Paul's letters. He'll call them a part of this ecclesia, an assembly, or church, or holy ones, or saints.
Okay.
Right. Chosen, called out. Like, what does this type of language do?
What does it mean?
Okay.
And so, and thinking about it in line with a Jewish prophet, rather than just imagining Paul as like the first Christian apostle, but like as a Jewish prophet who's received a message that he wants to spread to the heathens or the pagans or the Gentiles.
Yeah.
And how does that influence what he's calling this group when he calls them saints or holy ones? And I didn't get to the third thing. Here's the third thing. Or maybe I did it. Maybe I'm a professor. The list just keeps going on. Remember that Paul thinks the world is going to end a week from Tuesday.
Really?
Oh, gosh, yes.
That really hits home for Dedeker.
Oh, yeah.
That was her whole
It makes
upbringing.
sense. Yeah, my entire upbringing, like, it has been like, yeah, Jesus is coming back, the world's ending, in the next few months. So, no, that is a really interesting perspective to put on it and to
Interesting.
layer in.
Yeah.
I would not have realized that.
Wow.
But like in that sense that like we think of kind of those like doomsday, I don't want to say cults, but believers today who are like, we are in the end times right now, like any day now.
Yeah.
This is going to happen. Like that was really his reality.
Well, because as I said with the timing, Jesus was just raised from the dead, like, a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
And so if God is starting to raise people from the dead, then
Who knows what's
Oh,
next?
he's already started. I guess that makes
Wow.
sense.
he's already, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That does
Right.
make sense.
Yeah. Huh.
Wow.
Dang. I mean, that's unfortunate if it's like, oh, Jesus is coming back, so everything's going to end. Like, when was anything good? Because the Old Testament had some rough stuff going on.
Well, I gotta say, it puts the celibacy thing in perspective also,
Yeah.
I think.
Oh?
If we only got to be celibate for another week or so, sure, anyone can do that.
That's not so
It's
bad.
Not so
yeah.
bad.
I guess. Goodness.
Wow.
Wow.
Whew. This was
Okay,
a lot.
thank you so much.
Lot to think about.
This has been great. Yeah, we
Yes.
have so much to think about.
Amazing.
I look forward to listening
Yeah, definitely.
as you engage.
Yeah.
Everyone will love it.
Now, Romans 1 is a doozy. I just want to warn you. It's terrible.
Okay.
Okay.
All
It's one of those
right.
clobber passage places.
Oh,
It's a doozy.
yeah.
We'll be ready.
Okay, we will be
ready.
ready.
As ready as we can be.
Yes.
Indeed.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you listening. We will be back with you next week, I think, if you're listening to the recorded version. We'll be back next week starting on Romans, which we've been warned about thoroughly now. And thank you, Dr. Jeremy Williams, for joining us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.